The Vellani research vessel Gentle Dawn was dying. It floated through the purple clouds of the Corax Nebula like a broken bird, its wings torn and its heart failing. Smoke filled the corridors. Sparks flew from damaged panels. The lights flickered on and off, casting strange shadows on the walls. Ambassador, Thailand pressed their four thin arms against the cold metal wall to stay standing. Their translucent skin, which normally glowed with a soft blue light, had turned pale gray from fear and exhaustion. Around them, the surviving crew members huddled together in the main chamber. Some were crying. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing. "How much time do we have?" Thailand asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Communication Officer Rayla checked her damaged console. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely read the numbers. 6 hours, Ambassador. Maybe 7 if we are lucky. After that, the air will become poison. We will fall asleep and never wake up. Thailand closed their large, dark eyes for a moment. They thought about the 43 souls aboard this ship. Scientists, teachers, diplomats, and in the lower deck, protected by every remaining power cell they had. 12 children on their first journey through the stars. The attack had come without warning. The Kreth Dominion, those brutal conquerors who believed that strength was the only law, had appeared from nowhere. Their warships had surrounded the Gentle Dawn like wolves around a wounded deer. The Vellani had tried to communicate, tried to explain that they were only researchers, that they meant no harm to anyone. The Kreth had laughed. Their war leader, a massive creature covered in thick scales and scars, had appeared on their screen. His yellow eyes had shown no mercy. "You are weak," he had said. "The weak exist only to serve the strong or to die. You have nothing we want, so you will die. Let this be a lesson to all the small races. The Kreth Dominion does not tolerate insects flying through our space." Then they had fired. Not to destroy, but to cripple. They had torn holes in the hull, killed the engines, and broken the life support systems. They wanted the Vellani to suffer. They wanted them to die slowly, knowing that no help would come. Now, 3 hours later, Thailand stood in the ruins of their ship and tried to find hope where there was none. "We must send a distress signal," they said. Rayla looked up with tears in her large eyes. "Ambassador, there's no one nearby who will help us. The Merchant Coalition will not risk angering the Kreth. The Terranian Empire does not care about species like us. We are too small, too unimportant. We must try," Thailand insisted. "We owe it to the children. We owe it to everyone who died today. Send the signal on all frequencies. Send it everywhere. If there is even one chance in a million that someone will hear us and come, we must take it." Rayla nodded slowly. She turned to her console and began working. Her fingers moved across the controls, sending their desperate cry for help out into the endless dark. The signal traveled far. It passed through nebulas and asteroid fields. It bounced off dead moons and ancient space stations. It reached civilized worlds where beings received it, looked at the source coordinates, and chose to do nothing. The Kreth were too dangerous. The Vellani were too unimportant. It was not worth the risk, but the signal also traveled to places that were not on any civilized map. It reached coordinates that most species had learned to avoid. In the ancient databases of 100 worlds, these coordinates were marked with warnings in a dozen different languages. Quarantine Zone 7. Do not approach. Dangerous primitive species. Deathworld. The signal reached a small blue planet called Earth. In the space above this world. A heavy cruiser called the Iron Resolve was completing a routine patrol. It was an ugly ship by galactic standards. No elegant curves, no beautiful designs. Just thick armor, powerful engines, and enough weapons to fight a small war. It had been built for one purpose: to protect humanity from a universe that did not know them yet, On the bridge of this ship, Captain Nate Holloway was drinking his third cup of coffee and reading reports about cargo shipments. He was a man in his late 40s with gray hair, tired eyes, and hands that had seen too many fights. He had been a soldier before he became a captain, and he still carried himself like one. "Captain," said Lieutenant Megan Price from the communications station. She was young, with red hair tied back in a practical knot and freckles across her nose. "I'm picking up something strange. A signal from outside our patrol zone." "Way outside." Holloway set down his coffee cup. "What kind of signal?" "Distress call, sir. It's not in any human language, but the translation software is working on it." She paused, listening to her earpiece. "It's coming through now. They're called the Villani. Their ship was attacked. Life support is failing. They have—" Her voice caught. "They have children aboard, Captain. 12 children." The bridge fell silent. Every crew member stopped what they were doing and looked at their captain. Chief Engineer Danny Reeves, a big man with a bald head and grease-stained hands, spoke first. "How far out are they?" "2 days at maximum burn," Megan replied. "Maybe less if we push the engines harder than we should." "Can they survive that long?" Holloway asked. "The signal says they have about 6 hours of breathable air left." Danny shook his head. "Then we can't reach them in time. Not with our engines." "There might be a way," said Navigation Officer Chris Taylor, a thin man with glasses and nervous energy. "If we use the experimental drive core, the one we're supposed to be testing next month, we could cut the travel time in half. Maybe more." "That drive hasn't been fully tested," Danny warned. "It could blow up. It could tear the ship apart. It could throw us into a star for all we know." Captain Holloway stood up from his chair. He walked to the main view screen, which showed nothing but stars and empty space. Somewhere out there, 43 beings were waiting to die. 12 of them were children who had never had a chance to grow up. He thought about his own daughter back on Earth. She was 8 years old, with her mother's smile and his stubborn streak. What would he want some stranger to do if she was the one dying in the dark? "Get me Commander Lisa Monroe at Fleet Command," he said quietly, "and tell Danny to start warming up that experimental drive. We're going to save those people, or we're going to die trying." Megan stared at him. "Sir, the regulations say we're not supposed to make contact with unregistered alien species without clearance from—" "I know what the regulations say, Lieutenant. I also know that there are children dying out there while we sit here talking about paperwork." He turned to face his crew, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "We are going. Anyone who has a problem with that can file a complaint when we get back." No one filed a complaint. Within an hour, the Iron Resolve was burning through space toward a ship full of strangers, and 2 other vessels had diverted course to join them. The destroyer Nightfall and the medical frigate Mercy's Hand fell into formation behind their captain. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were coming fast. The experimental drive hummed with a sound that made Danny Reeves very uncomfortable. He stood in the engine room of the Iron Resolve, surrounded by pipes and cables and machines that were never meant to work this hard. Sweat dripped down his face as he watched the power readings climb higher and higher. "Come on, baby," he whispered to the engine like it was a living thing. "Hold together for me. Just a little longer." The ship shook. Warning lights flashed. Somewhere behind him, a young engineer named Sam Costa was praying quietly in Spanish. Danny did not believe in God, but he did not tell Sam to stop. At this point, they needed all the help they could get. Up on the bridge, Captain Holloway gripped the arms of his chair and watched the stars blur past the view screen. They were moving faster than any human ship had ever moved before. The universe itself seemed to be stretching around them, pulling them forward like a rubber band about to snap. "Time to target?" he asked. Chris Taylor checked his instruments with shaking hands. 14 hours, Captain. If the drive holds. It will hold, Holloway said, though he had no real way of knowing that. What about the other ships? Nightfall is right behind us. Mercy's Hand is a few minutes back, but they're keeping up. Chris paused. Captain, I have to ask. What do we do when we get there? We don't know anything about these aliens. We don't know what hurt them. We could be flying into a trap. Holloway had thought about that. He had thought about it a lot during the long hours of their journey. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw those numbers in the distress signal. 12 children. 12 small lives that would end in the cold darkness of space unless someone did something. We do what humans have always done, he said. We help people who need help. We figure out the rest later. On the medical frigate Mercy's Hand, Dr. Carla Bishop was preparing for patients she had never seen before. Her medical bay was filled with equipment designed for human bodies, and she had no idea if any of it would work on alien physiology. But she was a doctor, and doctors found ways to help. That was the job. The translation software has given us some information about the Volani, said her assistant, a young man named Jake Torres. He was reading from a tablet, his eyes wide with wonder and worry. They're a peaceful species. No military. No weapons. They focus on science and diplomacy. What about their biology? Carla asked. Similar to ours in some ways. Carbon-based. Oxygen breathers. But they're much more fragile. Lower gravity homeworld. Thinner bones. Weaker muscles. Jake looked up. Doctor, if they have serious injuries, they might not survive treatments that would be gentle for a human. Carla nodded slowly. Then we'll be gentle. Gentler than we've ever been. Get me everything you can find on low-gravity species. And prepare the soft tissue reconstruction equipment. If these people have broken bones, we need to be ready. Meanwhile, on the destroyer Nightfall, Commander Rosa Vega was having a very different conversation. She stood on her bridge surrounded by weapons officers and tactical displays, studying the little information they had about the attackers. The Kreth Dominion, she said, reading from the intelligence report. A warrior species. Conquest-based society. They believe that might makes right. The strong rule. The weak serve or die. Sounds like bullies, said her first officer, Lieutenant Ben Howard. He was a quiet man with a calm face, but his eyes were hard. I don't like bullies. Neither do I. Rosa zoomed in on an image of a Kreth warship. It was covered in spikes and weapons, designed to look as frightening as possible. If they're still in the area when we arrive, we might have to fight. Are we allowed to fight? Ben asked. Command hasn't exactly given us permission to start a war with an alien empire. Rosa smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Command told us to render assistance to the distressed vessel. They didn't say anything about what happens if someone tries to stop us. The hours passed slowly. On all three ships, crews worked and waited and tried not to think about what they might find when they arrived. Some wrote letters to family members back home, just in case they never came back. Others checked their weapons and armor, preparing for a fight they hoped would not come. In her small cabin on the Iron Resolve, Lieutenant Megan Price sat alone with her thoughts. She had been the one to receive the distress signal. She had been the one to translate those terrible words, children aboard. Now she could not stop thinking about what those children must be feeling. Scared, cold, waiting for help that might never come. Her door chimed. Come in, she said. Captain Holloway entered. He looked tired, older than his years. Lieutenant, I wanted to check on you. I'm fine, sir. No, you're not. None of us are. He sat down across from her. This is your first real mission, isn't it? First time facing something like this. Megan nodded. At the academy, They taught us about first contact protocols, diplomatic procedures, how to communicate with alien species. She laughed bitterly. They didn't teach us what to do when children are dying, and we might not get there in time. No one can teach you that, Holloway said quietly. Some things you just have to feel. The fear, the anger, the desperate need to do something, anything, to help. He leaned forward. Do you know why I became a captain, Megan? She shook her head. Because I got tired of waiting for other people to do the right thing. I got tired of rules and regulations that existed to protect politicians and bureaucrats. Out here, in the black, there's just us. Just people trying to help other people. He stood up. We're going to reach that ship, Lieutenant. And we're going to save those people. Because that's who we are. That's who humans have always been, even when we forget it. Megan wiped her eyes. And if we don't make it in time, then we'll know we tried. We'll know we flew faster and farther than anyone thought possible, because someone needed us. He walked to the door. Get some rest if you can. We'll be there soon. He left her alone with those words. Megan sat in silence for a long time, thinking about what it meant to be human. To be from a world where everything was trying to kill you. To survive ice ages and plagues and wars and still reach for the stars. To hear a stranger's cry for help and fly across the universe to answer it. Maybe that was what made humans special. Not their strength, not their technology, not their weapons, but their stubborn, impossible refusal to let people die alone in the dark. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. In 12 hours, they would know if it was enough. The ships flew on through the endless night. Behind them, Earth grew smaller and smaller until it was just another star in the sky. Ahead of them, a wounded vessel full of frightened people waited for a miracle. The miracle was coming. It was dressed in uniforms and carrying medical supplies and speaking a language that no Vellani had ever heard before. But it was coming, and nothing in the universe was going to stop it. The air inside the gentle dawn had become thin and cold. The Vellani survivors huddled together in the main chamber, sharing body heat and what little oxygen remained. Ambassador Thailand had stopped looking at the clock hours ago. Watching the numbers count down to their deaths had become too painful. The children were sleeping now, gathered in a corner under every blanket the crew could find. They had cried themselves to exhaustion, asking questions that no one could answer. Why did the bad people hurt us? When are we going home? Is someone coming to help? Thailand had told them yes. Someone was coming. They had lied, and they hated themselves for it. But what else could they tell frightened children in their final hours? Communication Officer Rayla had fallen asleep at her station. Her console had gone dark long ago, the power diverted to life support. There was nothing more she could do. There was nothing more anyone could do. Then the proximity alarm went off. It was weak. Barely more than a whisper from the damaged systems. But it was enough to wake Rayla. She stared at her console in confusion. Then disbelief, then something that might have been hope. "Ambassador," she said, her voice cracking. "Ambassador, there are ships approaching." Thailand rushed to her side. "The Kreth? Have they come back to finish us?" "No, these ships are different. I've never seen designs like this before." Rayla's fingers flew across the controls, trying to get more information from the dying sensors. 3 vessels. They're coming in fast. Very fast. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a grainy image of the approaching ships. Thailand felt their hearts stop. The vessels were terrifying. Angular and aggressive, covered in armor plating and weapons. They looked like predators, like creatures designed for violence and war. Nothing like the elegant ships of civilized space. These were the ships of hunters, of killers. "What are they?" whispered one of the scientists, a young male named Piran, who had been studying asteroids before this nightmare began. "I don't know," Thailand admitted, "but they answered our signal. Perhaps they are friendly. Or perhaps they are worse than the Kreth," said Security Chief Norin grimly. He was one of the few Vellani who had received any combat training, though that training was mostly about how to run away and hide. "We should prepare for the worst." "Prepare how?" Thailand asked. "We have no weapons, no defenses. If these beings want to hurt us, there is nothing we can do to stop them." The ships grew larger on the screen. The lead vessel, the ugliest and most heavily armed of the three, began broadcasting a signal. Rayla struggled to translate it. "They call themselves humans," she said slowly. "From a planet called Earth. They say they received our distress call and have come to help." "Help?" Norin laughed without humor. "Look at those ships. Look at those weapons. Those are not the vessels of healers. Nevertheless, we have no choice," Thailand said. "Open communications. Tell them they may approach." And they paused, looking at the frightened faces around them. "And tell them we are grateful." The human ships docked with the Gentle Dawn 20 minutes later. The Vellani gathered in the airlock chamber, watching the heavy door with a mixture of hope and terror. They could hear sounds from the other side. Metal clanging, voices speaking in a strange, rough language. Then the door began to open. The first human stepped through, and every Vellani took a step back. The creature was massive. It stood nearly twice the height of an average Vellani, with broad shoulders and thick limbs that seemed to be made of solid muscle. It wore a bulky suit that made it look even larger, and its movements had a fluid, predatory grace that spoke of danger. Then it removed its helmet, and Thailand saw its face for the first time. It was strange. Flat, with small eyes and a nose that stuck out from the middle. Skin that was pinkish-brown, covered with strange, tiny hairs. A mouth that seemed too large, with teeth that looked like they could tear through flesh. But the eyes were not the eyes of a predator. They were tired and worried and filled with something that looked almost like compassion. "I'm Captain Nate Holloway," the creature said. Its voice was deep and rough, but surprisingly gentle. "We received your distress call. We're here to help." More humans poured through the airlock behind him. Some wore the same military suits as the captain. Others wore white clothes marked with strange red symbols, and they carried cases of equipment. One of them, a female with brown hair and kind eyes, approached Ambassador Thailand directly. "I'm Dr. Carla Bishop," she said. "I need to know how many wounded you have, and how serious their injuries are. We have limited time, and I want to save as many as possible." Thailand found that they could not speak. This creature, this massive predator from a world they had never heard of, had crossed the void between stars to save strangers. It made no sense. Nothing in Vellani history or culture could explain it. "Ambassador?" the doctor prompted gently. "Forgive me," Thailand finally managed. "We have 17 wounded. 5 are critical. The others have minor injuries from the attack." They hesitated. "We also have 12 children. They are not physically hurt, but they are very frightened." Something changed in the doctor's face. Her eyes softened, and she turned to call out to her team. "Jake, get the pediatric supplies. And someone find me something soft for the kids to hold. Toys, blankets, anything." "We don't have toys." "Doctor," said a young male human. "Then make some." Her voice left no room for argument. Over the next hour, the Vellani watched in amazement as the humans transformed their dying ship into a place of hope. Medical teams moved with practiced efficiency, treating wounds and stabilizing patients. Engineers sealed hull breaches and restored life support. Someone found a way to make the lights work again, and through it all, the humans spoke to the Vellani with kindness. They asked about their culture, their homes, their families. They learned names and used them. When a Volani child woke up crying, a human soldier, a massive male with scars on his hands and death in his eyes, sat down beside her and told her stories until she fell asleep again. Ambassador Thailand found Captain Holloway standing by a viewport, looking out at the stars. "I don't understand," Thailand said quietly. "Why did you come? We are strangers to you. We have nothing to offer. We are small and weak and unimportant." Holloway turned to face them. His expression was unreadable. "You sent a distress signal," he said. "Someone hurt you. Someone left children to die in the cold." He shook his head slowly. "That's all we needed to know. But why? In all our dealings with other species, no one has ever come to help us simply because we needed help. There is always a price, always a reason." The captain was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his words would stay with Thailand for the rest of their life. "Where we come from, there's an old saying. The measure of a society is how it treats its weakest members. We don't help people because we expect something in return. We help because it's the right thing to do." He smiled slightly. "Besides, we know what it's like to be small and scared and alone. Every human does. It's part of who we are." Thailand felt tears forming in their eyes. "What happens now? Now we take you somewhere safe. And then we find out who did this to you." The captain's smile faded, replaced by something harder, something dangerous. "And we make sure they never do it to anyone else." For the first time since the attack, Ambassador Thailand felt something other than fear. They felt protected. They felt safe. They felt like they had found something they never knew existed, a species that would cross the stars to defend strangers, not for profit or power, but simply because those strangers were in pain. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they had brought mercy with them. The news spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. A species from Quarantine Zone 7 had responded to a Volani distress signal. They had saved the survivors. They had docked with the Kreth Dominion's victims and pulled them back from the edge of Death Dot in diplomatic halls and trading posts across civilized space. Beings whispered to each other. Humans. That was what they called themselves. A primitive species from a death world. A planet so dangerous that most civilized races could not survive on its surface for more than a few hours. The Turanian ambassador shared what little information existed in the ancient databases. Earth had gravity strong enough to crush Volani bones. Its atmosphere was full of a highly reactive gas called oxygen. Its surface experienced violent storms, extreme temperatures, and constant seismic activity. And its ecosystem was filled with predators that would give nightmares to any civilized being. How did intelligent life evolve on such a world? Asked the Volani representative, still shaken from his people's rescue. "We do not know," the Turanian admitted. "The quarantine was established thousands of years ago, before any of our civilizations reached their current form. We simply agreed to leave that region of space alone." "Perhaps that was a mistake," said a third voice. It belonged to the Merchant Coalition's senior trader, a calculating being who saw profit in every situation. "These humans seem useful, strong, capable. Perhaps we should establish relations." "You mean you want to use them?" the Turanian said coldly. "I mean, I want to understand them." There's a difference. But while the civilized galaxy debated what to do about humanity, the Kreth Dominion had already made their decision. War leader Krath sat in his command chamber aboard the battleship Crushing Fist, surrounded by his most loyal officers. The reports from his scouts had confirmed the rumors. A primitive species had entered Kreth space to rescue the Volani. They had interfered with Dominion business. They had made the Kreth look weak. "This cannot stand," growled War Commander Drex, his second in command. "The other servant races will hear of this. They will think they can resist us. They will think they can call for help. Then we must make an example, Krath said. His yellow eyes gleamed with cruel pleasure. We will find these humans. We will destroy their ships. And we will broadcast their deaths to every corner of the galaxy. What do we know of their military capabilities? Asked another officer. Nothing significant. They are from a primitive world. Their ships are crude. Their weapons are probably barely functional. Krath laughed, a harsh sound like rocks grinding together. This will not be a battle. It will be an execution. He gave the order. 20 Krath warships, the pride of the Dominion's fleet, set course for the coordinates where the human ships had been detected. They flew with confidence, with arrogance, with the absolute certainty that comes from never having lost a fight. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Admiral Tony Vance stood on the bridge of the carrier, unconquered, and studied the tactical display. 12 human ships had gathered in response to his call. It was not a large fleet by galactic standards, but it was the best humanity had to offer. Admiral, Krath fleet is approaching. 20 vessels. Mostly cruisers, with 3 capital ships in the center. Vance nodded slowly. He was a thin man with gray hair and cold blue eyes, a career military officer who had spent decades preparing for a fight he never expected to have. Now that fight was here, and he felt strangely calm. Open a channel, he said. All frequencies. I want everyone to hear this. The communications officer nodded. Channel open, sir. Vance straightened his uniform and began to speak. This message is for the Krath Dominion. I am Rear Admiral Tony Vance of the United Earth Defense Force. 1 week ago, your ships attacked a civilian vessel. You destroyed their engines. You murdered their crew. You left children to die in the cold of space. He paused, letting the words sink in. We are humanity. We evolved on a world where everything tried to kill us. The gravity crushed us. The weather froze us and burned us. The predators hunted us. The diseases devastated us. And we survived. We survived because we learned to fight before we learned to walk. We built our civilization on the bones of extinct monsters. The Krath fleet had entered weapons range. Their ships were moving into attack formation, clearly unimpressed by the human admiral's speech. You have 1 standard hour to surrender the commanders responsible for the attack on the Vellani vessel. If you do not comply, we will demonstrate why our region of space is called a quarantine zone. This is your only warning. The response came almost immediately. War Leader Krath's scarred face appeared on the view screen, twisted with contempt. Primitive fool, he snarled. You think your words frighten us? We are the Krath Dominion. We have conquered 100 worlds. We have crushed 1,000 enemies. You are nothing but animals from a poisonous rock. I was hoping you'd say something like that, Vance replied. All ships weapons free. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations. The human ships moved with a speed that should have been impossible. They dove and twisted and spun in patterns that would have killed any civilized crew, pulling maneuvers that generated forces strong enough to flatten Vellani or Terranium bodies to paste. But human bodies were different. Human bodies had evolved under crushing gravity, had spent millions of years being shaped by a world that showed no mercy. The Krath fired their weapons, but their targets were never where they expected. Human ships seemed to dance between the energy beams, closing the distance with terrifying speed. What is this? Drex shouted, watching 3 of his cruisers explode in rapid succession. How are they moving like that? Then the boarding parties arrived. Marine Sergeant Pete Caldwell was the first through the airlock of the Crushing Fist. He was a big man, even by human standards, with shoulders like a bull and hands that had broken bones in 3 different wars. Behind him came his squad, 12 soldiers in heavy armor, carrying weapons designed for close combat. The Kreth were larger than humans. They were covered in scales and natural armor. They had claws and teeth, and thousands of years of warrior tradition. It didn't matter. Caldwell shot the first Kreth warrior before it could raise its weapon. He broke the second one's arm with a strike that would have shattered stone. His squad moved through the ship like a force of nature, faster and stronger and more brutal than anything the Kreth had ever faced, because humans were not civilized. They were not polite. They had not spent millennia in comfortable peace, growing soft and gentle. They were predators from a death world, temporarily wearing the mask of civilization. And when someone hurt children, when someone left innocent beings to die in the dark, that mask came off. War leader Kreth died screaming. His last sight was Pete Caldwell's face, cold and merciless, as human hands closed around his throat. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, 17 Kreth ships were debris floating in space. 3 had surrendered, their crews begging for mercy they had never shown others. Admiral Vance recorded another message, this one broadcast to the entire galaxy. The Kreth Dominion attacked civilians. They murdered innocents. They threatened children. Today, they learned that there are consequences for such actions. He stared into the camera with eyes like ice. Let this serve as a warning. Humanity does not start fights, but we finish them. And if you hurt the helpless, if you prey on the weak, we will find you. We will come for you, and we will show you what it means to face a species that death itself could not destroy. In diplomatic halls across civilized space, ambassadors watched the recording in stunned silence. The Merchant Coalition representative had stopped calculating profits. The Terranian ambassador had gone pale beneath her scales. What have we awakened? Someone whispered. No one had an answer. But in a small medical bay on the Mercy's hand, 12 Valani children slept peacefully for the first time in days. They did not know about the battle. They did not know about the death and violence that had been unleashed on their behalf. They only knew that the scary humans had promised to protect them. And humans, they were learning, always kept their promises. 6 months had passed since the battle that changed everything. 6 months since the galaxy learned that the quarantine zones were not empty, that the primitive species they had forgotten about had become something far more dangerous than anyone imagined. The Galactic Council had summoned an emergency session. Representatives from 100 different species gathered in the great amphitheater on a neutral world of Harmony Prime, their faces displaying every emotion from curiosity to fear. Today, they would vote on a question that would shape the future of civilized space. Should humanity be allowed to join the galactic community? Ambassador Thyland stood at the speaker's platform, looking out at the assembled delegates. They had changed in the past months. The fear that had haunted them since the attack on the Gentle Dawn had faded, replaced by something stronger: purpose, conviction, the absolute certainty that they were about to say something important. Beside them, in the visitors' gallery, sat the human delegation. Ambassador Karen Webb led the group, a small woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. She wore a simple blue uniform, nothing like the elaborate robes of most galactic diplomats. Behind her sat Captain Holloway, Dr. Bishop, and a dozen other humans who had been involved in the rescue. The council speaker, an ancient being from a species so old that no one remembered their original name, called the session to order. "We gather today to consider an unprecedented request," the speaker said, their voice echoing through the chamber. "The species known as humanity has petitioned for membership in our community. Before we vote, we will hear arguments for and against." The first speaker was the Merchant Coalition representative. He slithered to the platform, his scales gleaming under the lights. "I urge caution," he said. "These humans are unknown, unpredictable. We have seen what they did to the Kreth Dominion. In a single battle, They destroyed a fleet that had terrorized this region of space for generations. He paused for effect. What will they destroy next? Us? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many delegates nodded in agreement. Furthermore, the merchant continued, their homeworld remains classified as a death world. Their biology is adapted for violence. Their history, what little we know of it, is filled with war and conflict. They are not like us. They are not civilized. He returned to his seat, looking satisfied with his argument. The next speaker was the Terranian ambassador. She approached the platform slowly, her expression thoughtful. I will not pretend that I am not afraid of humanity, she admitted. I watched the recordings of the battle against the Kreth. I saw their soldiers board enemy ships and fight with a ferocity that I cannot comprehend. She shook her head. But I also saw something else. I saw their medical teams working to save Vellani lives. I saw their engineers repairing a broken ship. I saw their warriors sitting with frightened children, telling them stories until they fell asleep. She turned to face the human delegation. The Kreth attacked civilians because they believed the weak deserved to suffer. The humans crossed the void to save those same civilians because they believed the weak deserved to be protected. These are not the same values. These are not the same species. More murmurs, but different ones. Some delegates were reconsidering. Finally, Ambassador Thailand stepped forward. The chamber fell silent. I was there, Thailand said simply. I was on the gentle dawn when the air was running out and hope had died. I watched my people prepare to say goodbye to each other. I held a child who asked me if someone was coming to help, and I lied to her because the truth was too terrible to speak. They paused, gathering their strength. And then the humans came. They came in ships that looked like nightmares. They came with faces that belonged to predators. They came from a world so dangerous that we have forgotten it existed. Thailand's voice grew stronger. And they came to help. Not for profit. Not for power. Not for any reason that makes sense to civilized minds. They came because they heard strangers crying in the dark. And they could not bear to do nothing. Thailand walked to the edge of the platform, looking directly at the delegates who had expressed fear. Yes, they are dangerous. Yes, they are from a death world. Yes, they have the capacity for violence that we cannot match. They smiled slightly, but they choose how to use that capacity. Every day, they choose. And when they found us dying in the void, they chose to be heroes. They gestured toward the human delegation. I have spoken with these beings. I have shared meals with them. I have watched them laugh and cry and worry about their families back home. They are not monsters. They are not mindless killers. They are people. People from a harder world. People who have seen more darkness than we can imagine. But people nonetheless. Thailand's voice rose, filling the chamber. The Kreth believed that strength was the only thing that mattered. They believed that the strong had the right to prey on the weak. And where are the Kreth now? Their leaders are in chains awaiting trial for war crimes. Their fleet is wreckage. Their empire is crumbling. They turn to face the full assembly. That is the lesson the humans taught the galaxy. Strength without mercy is just cruelty. Power without compassion is just oppression. True strength is knowing when to hold back, when to help, when to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Thailand took a deep breath. If this council refuses to welcome humanity, then the Vellani will stand with them alone. We will leave the galactic community and build something new with our human friends. Because we have learned something that perhaps you have forgotten. Their final words echoed through the chamber like a prayer. The measure of a civilization is not how it treats its strongest members. It is how it treats its weakest. And by that measure, humanity is the most civilized species we have ever encountered. Silence followed. Then, slowly, delegates began to stand. The Terranian ambassador was first, followed by representatives from dozens of other species. Some were small and weak, species that had lived in fear of the Kreth for generations. Others were larger, stronger, beings who recognized something in the humans that they wished they saw in themselves. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was welcomed into the galactic community, not as dangerous primitives to be quarantined and feared, but as members, as partners, as friends. Ambassador Karen Webb approached the platform to accept the Council's decision. She was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes. "On behalf of all humanity, I thank you," she said. "We did not come to the stars looking for power or conquest. We came because we looked up at the night sky and wondered if we were alone. Now we know the answer." She looked around at the assembled species, so different from each other, so different from her own people. "We are not alone. None of us are. And together, we will build something worth protecting." The ceremony concluded with an exchange of gifts and a feast that brought together foods from 100 different worlds. Humans and aliens mingled, talking and laughing and slowly learning that different did not mean dangerous. In a quiet corner of the celebration, Captain Holloway sat with Ambassador Thylon and Dr. Bishop. They watched the festivities with tired but happy eyes. "What happens now?" Thylon asked. "Now?" Holloway smiled. "Now we figure out how to work together, how to help each other, how to build a future that's better than the past." "And the Kreth?" Thylon asked. "What will happen to them?" "Their leaders will face justice," the captain said. "The rest of their people will have a choice: join the community or continue their old ways alone. We're not in the business of destroying civilizations, just the monsters who use them to hurt others." Thylon nodded slowly. "I never thanked you properly, Captain, for coming when we called, for saving us when no one else would." Holloway shook his head. "You don't need to thank us, Ambassador. We did what anyone should do. We just got there faster." Nevertheless, Thylon reached out with one of their 4 arms and touched the captain's hand gently. "You gave my people hope. You showed us that the universe is not as cruel as we feared. That kindness exists, even in the darkest places." Dr. Bishop smiled warmly. "That's what humans do, Ambassador. We evolved in darkness. We grew up surrounded by danger and death. But we never stopped believing that tomorrow could be better than today." She looked around at the celebration, at species that had been strangers learning to become friends. "And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to help others believe it too." The party continued late into the night. Across the galaxy, the news spread. Humanity had been welcomed into the community of civilized species. The quarantine zones were open. The Deathworlders had arrived, and in a small apartment on Earth, in a city called Seattle, a little girl named Emma Holloway watched the announcement on her family's view screen. She did not fully understand what it meant, but she saw her father standing with strange and wonderful beings, and she saw the way they looked at him with gratitude and respect. "Daddy," she whispered to the screen, "I knew you'd help them." Far away, in a galaxy that was suddenly much smaller, her father seemed to hear her. He smiled at nothing, at everything, at the future that was just beginning. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they had brought hope with them.